What's up, YouTube? My name's Kevin. You've tuned in here probably because you found this somewhere. Two paths, maybe. You're looking at music production or you're looking at a way of staying out of trouble. And hopefully, this will help you with both of them. I recognize that some people will be tuning in from Sydney, Australia, and some people will be in the same situation as me, and that is we're back in lockdown. So, I thought, what better way for me to kind of give back than to show you an easy way to stay indoors and to keep productive, to keep your hands unidle, in idle, keep your hands moving, give you something to do. If you have any interest in music, whether it be electronic or whether it be actually playing instruments, singing maybe, or maybe you want to do a podcast or whatever it is in the world of audio or music, I'm going to show you an easy way to get involved in the recording process of it using Reason, which is relatively affordable. I think there's a 7-day trial on their website. I have no affiliation at all with them, but I've been using it for a long time. So some of my other streams are a bit more advanced. So if that's you, maybe find those ones. But this is just for people who stumbled on this somehow, looking for something to do. Comment me down below with all the things that you would have, all the crimes you might have committed if it wasn't for this video. Don't do that. Just enjoy it for what it is, and if you get something out of it, go a bit further, send me the tracks you made. Let's jump right over into Reason. So this is what we're going to look at. This program is broken down into 3 sections. So again, super basic, super basic. So the 3 sections we've got is this middle section where we can load up some instruments, so some different kinds of drum sounds, different kinds of real instrument, a way to mimic playing like a violin or those kind of instruments, and also a way to have synthesized instruments. So synthesize is more if you think like a keyboard or some of those sounds. So those 3 things are what we're going to look at in this middle section, as well as having some effects. So we can do some distortion, some echoes, some of the fun stuff that you can play with. This will happen in this middle section. At the top here is the last thing we're going to look at. So I don't know why I went in second place, and I'll tell you why, because I don't have notes. The top section here is when you've done everything, you master it, right? So setting different levels. So if you have a drum, and if you have, where am I? If you have a drum, first time using this little slither thing, so bear with me on that. If you have a drum going, and you have a voice, let's say, and you have a guitar, setting those 3 things at different levels, we do it in this section. And then up the top, if we want to have some kind of effects and stuff, we have some of that control in here as well. Probably not for this this very basic stream. So we're going to look at this section very quickly at the end. And down here is where we can start to track things. So tracking means if you have a way of looking at a piece of audio in a linear fashion, this will happen down the bottom here. So as we play, it'll run as you expect from left to right. Well, maybe not, but it will run from left to right, triggering any kind of MIDI information. So if we're playing a drum, it'll run and it'll say, we're playing the bass drum, we're playing the snare drum. Now this will happen down the bottom section. As well as if we're going to record something, let's say you play guitar, you want to record yourself playing guitar, it'll happen down in this section here. So all this is where we can kind of arrange the tracks. Let's think about it that way. In the middle section is where we can set up the sound for each of the sources, each of the instruments, as well as the effects. And then at the top is where we can give it the final polish and make sure that things are sitting where they want, both in levels, so in the audio levels, the volume, I guess you'd put it that way. And also we can do some panning, so we can start to get some stereo, put things on the left-hand side, the right-hand side. That'll happen up here. And then the last pane, which is not really a workflow pane per se, but this is where we pull our instruments and our effects. If we have samples, we can have quick access to these via this pane. There's other ways to do it as well, but let's keep it the simplest way, and that is by using this left pane. We're going to start with this real quick by just running down exactly what comes out of the box. I believe this is pretty close to stock with Reason Studios. If not, it's close to it. So we start off with these 2 drums. The difference between these 2 is this is more of a drum machine. So if you think about like, all these are pieces of kit, right? Like they're real instruments that you could have in a rack. So this imitates a rack, and each time we have an instrument, we add an instrument to the rack, right? we could probably best illustrate this if, let's not do that. Let's just keep it basic. Like, okay, no inappropriate jokes either. Let's just keep it basic. So yeah, this is a very simple drum machine. You have the bass drum, you have the snare or the clap is usually in here. The hats are around here. So selecting one of these, you select the bass drum, and let's just say on these 16 beats, you want one, and you want one on the 9th beat, okay? What that means is when you play, it's going to play from left to right and go. It's going to play the first, it's going to play the 9th, first, 9th. Having a second sound that triggers. So let's say we want to clap on, you've got the first, and then you got 2, 3, 4, then you got 5. We want one on the 5, right? So we'll put one in there and one on the 13th. So now we've got the. So very simply, if you want to play around with a drum machine and that makes sense to you, use it in this fashion. And then down the bottom here, you'll see every time you add an instrument, it will add into 2 places. So anytime any instrument is added into the middle section, you're also going to get a corresponding tracking, or what they call a sequence, I guess, in the bottom section. So this is this hip hop drum, and this is the hip hop drum, right? So these 2 labels. If you ever lose track of where you are in the song, you can always click on it, and the corresponding things will light up, right? And you're also getting a corresponding fader up here. So that's it for that. If you want to explore this instrument, there's more than just this, the sounds. There's very experimental, I guess, kind of sounds. If you click on these open folder buttons, this pane will now open to what's relevant with patches for that instrument. So now you can say, I want an electronic drum. Let's try this one, drag it over. Now that same sound in the same, the same format that we had. So the bass drum playing and then a clap, and is now going to have a different sound attached to it. Right. That's that. If you want to, if it makes more sense to you to use something which is more pad based, there's this Kong, and that looks like this. So that's triggering rather than on this linear fashion of 1 beat, 5 beat, which makes sense to a lot of, if you're more of the old school, that will make sense to you. But this might make a bit more sense. If you've got a touch screen, this is really cool because you can actually touch each pad like you would with a mouse to trigger it. So this is more like an NPC, or maybe if you're familiar with, the name escapes me now, like Native Instruments or like those kind of touchpad kind of stuff. This is another way to get drums. So play around with that one if that makes sense to you. Now we're going to move on to, we're going to skip this. This is a loop player if you want to have a sample play and you can chop up a sample and stuff, but that's a bit more advanced. We're going to go into the synthesized sounds now, and we're going to start. There's 3 that I want to focus on in this one, and that's it's simple, it's basic, but that's not by any means irrelevant in any kind of music production, because they're very powerful. It's just, when I say it's basic, there's less to tinker with. So we're going to start with this subtractor. The subtractor is, it'll run two oscillators. An oscillator is a way of having a waveform. So something very simple like a hum or a tone, and then you use that to shape it and make different noises out of, so you can make it a bit more spiky and it'll sound a bit more harsh. Very simple. We're keeping this very simple again. If you want to play around with this, this is a great way to get into the synthesizer instruments in Reason. This subtractor, you can't break it. And in fact, if you try to break it, you're probably getting a really cool sound out of it. So keep that one in your pocket. Same deal as the last one. If you click on this open folder button, this pane is now going to open up. I'm going to show you the bottom section here. We're going to just add in some very simple notes. We're going to do this with the mouse. You can do it with MIDI if you've got a MIDI keyboard. Very simple to select whatever instrument that you want to control with your MIDI device. Select it down the bottom, and once it's selected, you'll be able to play a MIDI keyboard. and you can record. So you record, you play. It's going to record those MIDI instruments. But I'm assuming that you might not be on that, or you might be like me. I choose not to play MIDI instruments when using Reason, and that's because, to me, visually, it makes a lot of sense. This program, a music production program, makes a lot of sense to use visually. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The two things that we're going to use down here are these two first ones. So the very first arrow is how we move things around. We're going to use that in a second. But the second one is a little pen or a pencil, some kind of writing device. If we were to choose that, we could draw in a block. And a block is a way to kind of group things around, so you can use a module. So if you have a little bass line, you can make that a module. Not sure how I feel about this sliver. You can have a module that you can duplicate, put it somewhere else, and every time it runs along and comes across that block, it's going to play the same thing. So we add a block in here, and now if we double click in the block, this is where the cool stuff starts to unfold, and this is where it's going to make more sense if you're a bit more musically inclined in the electronic sense. And then we're going to look at, if this doesn't make sense to you, we'll look a little bit forward of this video into recording audio. So we double click it, and now if we make this a little bit bigger so we can all see, now we start to see something that looks kind of familiar, right? We're talking about music, and now we have this keyboard. So what does this mean? This means, if you think about this as a grid, we talked about the linear progression of the song. So we're going to run, if we press play, we're going to be running along the track this way. And then the other side of the grid is that this keyboard, as we go up, it's going to go up. Cool. If you know anything about music, you'll be able to kind of track that this is a middle C. And again, hitting that pencil is what we're going to use to start penciling in notes. So if we were to click on that middle C, now we have a C note there. If we, let's say we want a D for the next one, and actually, that's a C. So this is my way of proving to you that you don't need to be able to, you don't need music theory to make something that sounds cool and sounds experimental, right? So don't worry too much about, I don't know how to do it, because I don't know either, right? But somehow it ends up, if you stick at it and you're persistent and you get what your ear wants to hear to happen, as long as you're patient, you'll get it. But that's beyond the scope of this short video. We got a C here. The next one we're going to play is a D. Let's keep it real simple. Go back to a C. And then a D. So we're just going to use this as a way to kind of show what we just talked about. That's going to go left to right, and it's going to play something going up, going down, going up, going down, going up, going down. So let's keep it real basic again. Right down the bottom, we're looking right down the bottom. We have these wow, what do they call them? These playback controls, I guess. So we got stop, we got play, we got record. We got one here which is a loop. So if we're back on here and you see an L and an R, and this is turned on, we're going to loop between here. So this is really cool if you want to work out some kind of little melody, or you want to hone in on a piece of audio that you're playing and you don't want to keep stopping and starting. It'll just loop. You turn it off and it's going to ignore these. Okay. And then to the left of that, we have where it says 120. This is the beats per minute. So the higher this goes, the faster the song will go, the lower it goes. You guessed it. Didn't need to say it. The rest of the stuff, don't worry about all this. That's all we're going to need. Just these. So let's play. We're going up. We're going back down. We're going back up. See, we had that loop on. And then it's going to keep going, right? Cool. So now that we have that, we can start to listen to what we're doing with these instruments. So this is, I said, this is a very simple synthesizer. And if you say that 5 times, Genie might pop out. It's a very simple synthesizer. But it can do some cool stuff. So you can, let's go into the bass. We'll just pull out a random bass. Right. So right off the bat, you can see there's a lot of different applications that you can use for this. And what I mean by that is a lot of genres, I guess, of music you can make using a synthesizer. You might not notice that it's not going to be like, you think of a synthesizer like the Final Countdown, cheesy 80 music, but it doesn't have to be, right? You can make a smooth bass sound out of here. We've got stuff like pads as well. So a pad, if you're making chilled out music or you're making some kind of, you've got a podcast and you want something going on in the background. Pads, right? So we're using the same notes, but it just sounds different. It doesn't sound spiky. It sounds more like a blanket or a soft tissue with some notes. And just to kind of finish off real quick, what else we can do in Subtractor is more percussion kind of stuff, so bells and clicks and stuff like that. Effects, which is super experimental. Let's just go into that real quick. Just pull out a random one. Right? Maybe you want to make it as the Halloween song in July. Who knows? We're stepping up now from Subtractor to Maelstrom. Maelstrom is a really cool synthesizer, which has been a staple of Reason for a little while now, and for good reason. So if we are to drag an instrument into our rack, we'll get a new instance of it. So now let's do that real quick, but then we'll undo it. So we're going to click an instrument, we're going to drag it into the rack. We're going to let it go. So now we have 2 faders, one for the original one that we had and one for this new one that we've got. We've also got 2, this edit, hopefully you can see that down there. This edit mode is also another important button that we're going to use. If we were to be out of edit mode, we see this block mode where we can start to move blocks around. If we're in edit mode, that's when we start to play around with the notes. So yeah, I neglected that, but that one is going to be important going forward. We're going to take this block, right? And this is going to form a basis of when you start to sequence songs, when you start to build a song. So you've got a tune and now you want to build a song out. You want the drums to start here and then stop here. You want the synth to come in here. This is where you say it's going to stop here. No, actually, I want it to go more. So you'd put another one in, right? So we're going to take this original one from this original synthesizer, the Subtractor that we used with those cool bass sounds. We could use a lot of other sounds, but we will listen to the bass sounds. And we're going to drag it onto this new one. Cool. So this note information that we had, the doon, 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 this is going to now control this instrument. And we can prove that. Again, we're just going to play with just the patches that are in here. We can immediately see, right, this is a lot more, there's a lot more control on this one, that we can do cool stuff. We can shape things the way we want it to. So we're talking about the wave before. We have a simple wave. This will have more control on it. We can put 2 at the same time, and we can use those 2 to kind of influence each other and make a third sound out of using 2 oscillators. So this is cool, but again, we're just going to look at the stock, the patches that come with it, right? So let's click this this folder icon, and now this pane opens up to the relevant patches for the Maelstrom. Very similar to what we have for the Subtractor. We got the bass, we got the effects, which is the kind of wacky stuff. We've got a mono and a polysynth. Think about it like the mono is going to be like a smaller version. The poly is going to have more stuff going on at the same time. Play around with it and see what kind of sound you've got in there. Pads, again, we got the same thing in there. Now this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting. We've got a rhythmic pattern, and we can see in here. Let's go back this is playing exactly the same note information, exactly the same MIDI information, whether you're playing it on your keyboard or here we've just said we want a C note, we want a D note, C note. That's all we've got, and now the rest of it is up for that instrument, for the synthesizer to interpolate, right? So having that CD on this first instrument, which is this, now we're going to give that, rather than rounding it to this guy, it's down on this track, so it's going to go to this guy. But very, very cool sounds can come out of this. This is a good way for you to have fun, to lose a lot of time, and to stay out of trouble. Yep. If you do have a MIDI keyboard, another thing that I'll just point out to you is that if you want to right click on things, so let's say you want to start to that pitch bend wheel, you'll notice you've probably got one on your nope. You've probably got one on a physical piece of kit, right? If you wanted to use this physically, you could always map what you see on the screen, basically anything you see on the screen, to any input that you have MIDI-wise. And it's as simple as right-clicking on what you want to map, editing the automation, and then from there, you can play it on the you can play it on what you're on what you want to control within reason. Within reason, there you go. You might need to override stuff, again, a bit more advanced, but if you know what you're doing and you have the keyboard, you'd probably want to use that, so look into that. Let's just clear that out. Jumping through real quick, and the last one that I want to show, and this is going to be a real quick one, and this is the last synthesizer that we're going to look a little in depth into, and this is the Europa. And the Europa is this is the creme de la creme, as Cyrus would say. The difference is you can see stuff starting to move around, right? So this is more of a dynamic sound. So rather than just having the same kind of wave being expected, this will add some dynamic stuff into it. So some movement in there, which is this is cool. But let's just stick to what's in the box, and that is if we click on this again. Much of the same as we had before. We got the rhythm, which we had in the Maelstrom again, and on top of this now we have textures and we have melody, and you can play with this on your own time. Let's keep this video short, but let's just all right, and what's cool about Europa as well is, let's say we wanted to have two things playing at the same time, you can do that as well. So whereas Subtractor, we could have one thing going at a time. So it's more of an old school way of just having a line that changes. This one you can have more than one line play at the same time. So now we've got all right. Let's just point out the other synthesizer that we have, and that is if we go to this complex, play around with this. I don't want to get into this because, as the name implies, it's a bit complex. Super fun to use and to play around with. And we also have this is a bit of a hybrid, but this as well, friction, I believe, will come out of the box as well. And if you're looking at classical instruments, so there's violins and cellos and stuff, and this is where you can get something to sound a bit different than what your friends are doing. Pretty cool, right? A lot of classical instruments in there. Play around with friction as well. And just to close out that, we've also got the Parsec, which is another synthesizer. Really cool for doing very chilled stuff like soundtrack, things like that, or adding pads in the background. And then there's one more, which is the Scenic, which again you'd use the same kind of for the same similar applications. This is a bit more processor heavy, so if your PC isn't if you play around with it, but you might not be able to use this to its full potential if you've got a lot of instruments going. So that's that. Let's look at the samplers. So we have what is a sampler? Let's start there. A sampler is something that will play a sound which has been recorded, most likely with a microphone. So somebody playing a bass guitar. Let's start with the bass guitar. Somebody playing a bass guitar will I'm now questioning whether, and this is how this is absolute testament to Reason's instruments. I'm questioning whether this is actually synthesized or sampled. Let's leave that one out and go to a real sampler. So the sampler we go to is going to be this NNXT, and through here, same thing. We can open stuff up. We got a lot of different kind of instruments which sound real because they're really real. They've been really recorded, and what we're playing back now is a sample of that rather than a generated version from a wave that we've manipulated. So stuff like, let's get a trumpet. I love me a trumpet. Cool. So that's what a sampler would do for you. There's a lot more applications than just your typical instruments. You could also have samples of voices coming through here. And there's also something which is not entirely sure, but you'll see in some patches you'll have more than one instrument. So you'll have, let's say, a string ensemble as a sample. So you'll be able to press a button and have essentially what would sound like 3 or 4 different instruments. So 2 violins, a viola, and a cello playing just by sampling, just by triggering one sample. So this is cool for doing that kind of stuff. If you want to get into it a bit more, you can open it up and play with that. And now we're going to go to effects, but just before we do, let's just close out the other instruments that we've got, which are similar to the ones we spoke about. So we've got the 2 drum machines here. The other drum machine, we have the other drum samples that we can get are these 2. So the oomph club drums is exactly what it sounds like, and the retro has a lot of cool sounds if you're doing like lo-fi kind of stuff. Very cool for that. And also the Reason drum kit is a very good representation of real drums, of rock drums, of jazz drums. Very much in the same way as we programmed the Kong. The Kong device is the same way that we'll program this. So we need to press buttons. So if we have MIDI information coming from pads, that's how we would trigger that one as well. And the other drum that we have is this rhythmic drum machine, and I wouldn't worry about this unless you're particularly interested. For what it's worth, this drum machine and this bass synthesizer, I believe, were imported in from an app version of this that they had or something. If you're looking for a very simple sound, these 2 might be your go-tos. And the other sampler is this NN19, which is a drop-down version of this NNXT. So there's no real need for that to be used either. And this tuned percussion is some very cool kind of exotic. Right, really cool stuff. And then the last one that we've got is the last two, sorry, is the World Instruments, which I guess is exotic in name. Kind of similar, except, yeah, I mean, kind of similar, just different instruments that are sampled in there. Right, different stuff. And then there's also a voice instrument. And if I can give you one, no, you find your own sound. I love that. You find your own sound. And that wraps it up for the instruments. We're going to go into the effects. We're going to do this real quick. The last one is this layers. Play around layers if you want. The last thing that I want to do in this middle section is look at the effects. And we're going to do this with our original. Let's look at this right. So this is very simple, coming from the subtractor that we first used. And now if we go, rather than into instruments where we've been looking, we've got effects. So effects, it looks like there's a lot here, but there's a handful that you should probably start with, and that is the distortion. So this Scream 4 distortion, we press the open arrow, the open folder button. We find what's relevant to that device only, and then through here we can say, let's try this. Right, just different forms of distortion. You could record a clean guitar track. We haven't looked at audio yet, but you could record audio of a guitar track clean and then use this as a replacement for pedals and like a stomp deck or whatever you're using on your guitar. There's also another version of this Scream. This is very you'll recognize a lot of distortion that comes out of here. Very widely used for good reasons. They're very nice sounds that come out of here. A little more unorthodox is something called the pulverizer. So again, simple, similar kind of sound. It's a newer instrument and just different patches. So you can play around with this and look for different kind of yeah, the one thing that this does have is the dynamic feel to it as well. So rather than just distorting as a blanket, it can move through and distort things using this top section, this tremor section. Is like the oscillator that we talked about, having a wave. Now you can kind of use a wave to distort on that, so have things sound like it's tremoring. Hence the name. We've got, let's jump down to echoes. So if you want to echo something, there's something called the echo, so you won't be able to lose that one. Hopefully we can hear that. Let's turn things up. Play around with all this. Yeah, don't leave it at what I've been explaining. Kind of dive into these instruments, but that's for you to discover your own sound. Right. If you're looking for an echo, let's turn that off. If you're looking for an echo, the echo is there. The chorus is kind of similar, but it's not going to give a noticeable echo. It's going to give more of an open feel, like an open reverb kind of feel. There is a reverb as well. If you want to use that, it's this RV700. If you load it up, there's a million patches, and this is again a tried and true effect unit that's been around for ages, but for good reason it's still in here. If you an easy way before you can really find your own sound, an easy way and a good tip that I'll give you is that if you're running a drum and you want an echo on a drum, come down and find the drum ones. If you're running a vocal and you want to put vocals on it, an echo, a reverb on the vocals, come down to the vocals and stuff like that. But don't stay within that, because the cool sounds you can find is if you use a vocal effect on a drum, or you use one of these cab reverbs on a synth. Like this is the cool stuff with Reason, is that you can patch everything together, however you want to, however you can imagine, right? So this subtractor is running into this now. If we were to put another distortion after it, now the kind of the line that's running down. So if you were physically patching a device into a device and then patching that device into another device, we're now transmitting this signal through this unit, right? So changing the order that you put things in can give you a different sound. Probably will give you a different sound. And as you get, this might be where you're like, I'm in, is that once you've got this down, the cool stuff that you can do with not a steep learning curve at all, is if you press tab, we've now flipped around and you can start to patch your own devices. You can say, I want this one, the output of this. Let's not go too much into this, but if that excites you as much as it excites me, you can have some fun on that. If you're more old school and you like to, let's just see what happens if I put this lead in here. Oh. Let's go back through these. You got a kind of a gate kind of unit, which is this alligator. For you, no, there is a if you're thinking about auto tune, there's an equivalent which is a bit more customizable, and you can really get your hands dirty in it. And that's this Neptune. So this is very cool if you want to say, I want everything to lock into only playing A's and D's, right? Well, let's keep it to whatever we had on the track. So no matter what we're going to use now, whatever pitch is coming out of the sound source is going to be dragged into those two notes. So if you sing off key, but you want it to stick to two notes or however many notes are selected, it'll kind of self-correct itself to that. So there's that, and the other side of this, which is seldom used but it's super cool, and that's the synth version of this. So rather than having a source just be locked into the correct pitch like an auto tune, if you click on this button, can we see that? Click on this, we're now into this voice synth mode, and this will add some extra flavor, some extra spices on it, and make some very cool additions. So let's have a look. And let's just go through this real quick. What I'm doing now is I'm just flicking this switch up, and this switch is on most instruments. Most instruments and most effect units, and it's in 3 positions. So we've got a bypass, which means it'll just bypass it. We have on, which is its default state. So when it's on, it's gonna do as we expect with the unit. But we can also turn it off, and if we turn it off, it kind of stops the chain. So this will generate a sound. It'll pass to here, it'll pass to here, but because this is off, it's not going to go through it and into our final mix. So what that means is it's not going to show in this section, and it's not going to hit our ears. So we're not going to use off, we're going to use bypass just to see what it sounds like when it's as if we didn't drop it in there, right? And we're going to bypass that distortion as well. So this is what we got, right? What I did there is on most effect units, and that's this dry wet So dry is the sound as if it was bypassed. Wet is the sound as if it was on. But now we have more of a fluid. It's not just on or off. We can go somewhere in the middle, right? Pretty cool, right? Yeah, so imagine that in your application of not only keeping things on key or in a scale, um, but also kind of warping. You can really use this to warp anything really. You can put any of these effects on any instrument, pretty much. That's that. A few other cool stuff is a guitar amp. So if you're running a real guitar like we talked about before, this amp, you can do anything from like overdrive to really like wah wah stuff. Anything like this is worth. If you're a guitar player, this is worth the price of admission alone. If you also got the corresponding bass amp, so this is the bass amp version. Very cool as well. There's some really cool slap sounds. And like I just want to show you something and this is where you can have fun, right? We've just put this bass amp on whatever we had going on there, right? And we can do it. Right? Like why not? If it was a real instrument, you could patch it together. So thinking about it that way, these devices, think about using anything anywhere, and you can have a lot of fun with Reason. Let's look through here. This stuff don't really you won't need to use. This is real fun. If you look at some of my other streams when I do my electronic music, this synchronous is I don't even know if bees have knees, but that's what that's what it would be. And this is the only other real one that you would that you can get cool sounds out of. So having a signal split and then slightly pitch shifted or extremely pitch shifted into different sources, and that again can be dynamically thrown around your left ear, right ear, and stuff like that. This is a very cool way of getting different sounds. So that is all that. The last section in this middle bit that we're going to look at, and this is going to be a real quick one. Well, this one is going to be real quick because we're not going to look at it, and that's the utilities. You can go through this. Most of this, I don't think. Have a look at it. There's cool stuff in. Again, you can put these anywhere you want. You can do anything with them. So there's cool stuff in there. But this players section is the last bit we're going to look at, and that's where you can have. Let's get back our Kong, right? So the Kong was our drum, right? And you might not be super comfortable playing finger drums or even drawing out the notes like we did before when we had the red drum, where we said we want this beat to happen on this, right? You might not be that might not be your thing. A quick way of doing it is with this in these players. We've got the drum sequencer. You drag this drum sequencer in, and right from the bat, we hit this open folder button. Right from the bat, we've got, let's say, what's something that's going to make sense to us off name alone? Breakbeat, right? We know what a breakbeat is. Let's load that up. So what this is doing, this is a preset somebody said, like we said before, when we were looking at this is going to play, and then it's going to go through, now this is going to play, now this is going to play. Somebody's programmed that in for us already. So if we don't want to do the legwork on that, someone's done it for us. So we load up sounds, we load up patterns, and then we use that to run it through an instrument. And in here we can have, let's not have it a rock drum, let's now have it a electronic or a tech drum or a brush drum, or so using the same kind of information, same kind of pattern, we're now going to use different instruments, different sounds from the instrument. And that's true as well with the other drums we looked at, like the real drums, and the oomph club drums and stuff. You can use this to trigger any of that stuff. So don't let the fact that you might not be able to program drums or play finger play drums, don't let that deter you, because somebody's done a super job of doing all that for us. Um, I'll leave this for you to look into, but if we were to change these buttons, we'd get different iterations of that pattern. So this might be very simple, very repetitive, and something like something like this might be if you're for a break. These split. If we can see, hopefully we can see that it's not a solid color; they're split. So this is going to play 4 times. So we can do something like see, like more of like a trap sound or something like that at this BPM anyway. And then there's also cool stuff you can do here to randomize. So down the bottom, this probability button, we can truth be told, I don't really use this, but there is some way that you can say, I want this one to only play 50% of the time or 30% of the time, and on the fly, it'll dynamically play it. So it can be very cool, very effective if you have something at the end of a bar and you only want it to play every now and then. Like it can do it for you, so you really don't have to painstakingly add and subtract hits. Very cool. So use that. Use that if you're getting into it, into drums. It's a simple. Let's look real quick. You want drums, right? All right, let's try a Kong. Now we go to a player and we put a drum sequencer in, and now we want to have let's go a down tempo synthetic pop with a triplet. We double click on that. Now our track has drums. Let's try something a bit different. Let's click on that. Right, out the box, super simple. Now let's get away from that and look at the last of the players. If you're on this and you've come so far, and I do appreciate that you are viewing this video, let's keep it under an hour. I totally didn't mean it to go so long. But yeah, if an easy way to make sure you don't slip up. Let me try to word this correctly. If you want to have a song properly musically correct, it's easy to do in Reason, and that's by using these scales and chord. You can drag this before any instrument. Just drag it in there like that. And now, if you want something locked into D minor, that's all you're going to get from it. You're not going to be able to get outside of that key. And also you'll be able to have chords and not chords. Let's not go into that. But if you want to use that, you want to make something that's technically correct without making sure each note is correct. That's super cool to use. There's also another way to do drums. I'm not going to push this on you, but there's this beat map, and you can just look around and go, oh, this section looks nice. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That I'll just leave it at that. But it's there if you want to use it. And then some other stuff here, which is a bit more advanced, but play around with that. Load up an instrument. Come down to these players. Drop them in. You know how to do that, just like we dropped in the drum sequencer. Same way. Drop these into an instrument and see what happens. That's your homework to do. So now we've done this, we're going to go down the bottom real quick, and then we're going to go up the top real quick, and then we're going to sign out. So down the bottom, we can now say this is going to play this instrument. Remember, we had the notes in there. So these 4 notes are going to play as long as this block is correct. It is is active, right? So it's going to play, and then at the end of it, it's going to stop playing. Let's just mute the drums. Let's see what happens. Right, so it's playing this because it's on this instrument, and then it's not playing it because it's not there anymore, and then it's starting to play this one because it's on this instrument. So very simply, make yourself a bunch of blocks and then use it where you want. So now we can make a new block. Remember, we had the pencil. We make a new, however long we want this block to be. Let's just do a short one. Let's put some random notes in. We use the pencil again. Right clicking on any of these, I'm a kind of visual person when I'm working, so you can right click and do it like this to a color that makes sense to you. You will now know that this will sound different than this, right? So start to set up a few blocks, set yourself up a few instruments, and then move stuff around. Cool. The tip that I'll give you here is to label stuff. So for me, this, let's say this kick to FM means nothing to me, right? But if I was to now double click on it and write, this is my synth, now I'll be able to quickly reference it. There's another two places where that name would be, and that is on the actual device up here. So it says synth up here, and also on the fader up here, which is the section we're going to go to now. So all right, we've got this synth has note information in a linear fashion. I think that's the phrase I was looking for. Down the bottom. And it also has a corresponding control in terms of the volume and the panning. Let's look at the EQ real quick. So there's three things we're going to use this section for. So as you'd expect, turning a fader down will turn the volume down. I didn't mean to insult your intelligence there. We've also got the panning above it, so going to the left, going to the right is now going to throw everything into the left on this first track, and it's going to throw everything onto the right onto this from this second track. So yes, if we scroll up, we can see this section. And let's not go so much up. In the middle is your EQ section. So if you want to add some EQ in there, we turn, let's make it big so we can see where it is. So this is the top. We go halfway down. And this section here, don't let it spook you out. You're not going to use this unless you want to use it. And that is if you turn it on, you'll be able to use the high frequencies, have some control over how much is amplified or decreased from that signal, from the top end, from any of the higher pitched sounds, I guess, if that makes sense to you. And then the middles, and then also the bottoms of the bass. That would make more sense to you. This is the treble section, and this is the bass section. So if you want to EQ just this track, just the synthesizer, you'll be able to take all the bottom end off, all the bass off. Right, or we add all the bass on. That's the difference between that. We're not going to worry too much about anything else except for this master fader. If you want something that's going to sound friendly, and by that I mean it's not going to hurt anybody's ears, and it's not going to break any headphones or speakers, just keep your eye on this, and before you start to save and share files, make sure that this isn't up in the red. Let's pump everything up so this is way too loud. And now I have to apologize because just what I said, I've just gone ahead and done, and I sincerely apologize. I don't like to go back on anything almost ever, but except for that, because that was my bad. So let's make sure this isn't going to clip. These red lights I'm going to turn on. So keep everything kind of basic. Keep this one down to about -6 before you start to understand what it is. First thing you should probably do is turn this down to -6 and make sure these don't go anything above 0. And that's in decibels, but don't worry too much about that. Cool. All right, let's go real quickly over exactly what we did, and we've got about 3 minutes to do it. So we've got 3 sections. We've got the middle section, which is where we put our instruments. Instruments can be anything like a synthesizer or drum machines or a sampler. And we've also got the opportunity to put anything in any place, which could be an effect. So an effect like a distortion, an effect like a reverb, anything like a bass amp, which doesn't belong on a synthesizer, we can still do on this. If we wanted to put, let's get crazy and put a bass amp on our drums, we can do it, right? Nothing's going to stop you from doing anything, unless it doesn't make sense, and then it just won't patch. So that's what we've got this middle section for. We can very easily match this middle section to the top and to the bottom sections with the names. So the name that we call this one, this is now, let's go to this Kong kit. Doesn't really mean anything to us, but if we say drum with bass amp, right, we've renamed that. So down the bottom now, we'll be able to see, actually, we need to change the name as well. But the top one is correct, that it did update the name. So we'll be able to see now anything in the middle into other sections, and that's the bottom section, which we use for tracking, also called sequencing. So sequencing is us putting notes in. It's us making those notes into blocks, and it's us moving those blocks anywhere we want in a linear passage. I don't know why I can't say that phrase, linear fashion. Everything's going to run from left to right up until the point where the song ends. We didn't touch on this, but if we were to save this file, it's going to have a bunch of silence up until this E. So this E marker is our end marker. So we'd probably want to say, let's just chop it off there. We've also got 2 other markers, and that's the left and the right. And if you play along at home, the left and the right, when this is enabled, will loop indefinitely. So it's a good way for us. We have a drum, and now we want to work out this line. So we want to start to play this. We want to get a melody out of this. So let's just keep it looping until we find it. Then we can break out of the loop, just like when Bill Murray learned his lesson in that one movie. We have that. We can easily color code things, which is a good way for us to keep track of what's going on. And we do that by right-clicking on it. Click color, and we can change any colors, which are quite cosmetic, but if they make sense to you, try to group them together. A good tip maybe that I use is the lower in frequency. So if it's a bass or somewhere, if we have a heavy drum or something like that, I'll use a darker color, so the reds or the vibrant purple, and then the top stuff is the yellows or the oranges, and the middle stuff is the greens or the blues. But that's up to you. Whatever makes sense to you. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. It doesn't really bother me. And then at the top, once we've got all this down, so we've got our instruments, which we can use as many as you want, as many as your computer can handle, your processor can handle. You could have 1 million synthesizers and 7 million drum machines if your computer can handle it. All in here, you're going to have, how many is that? 8 million? Faders up here, so you have fun controlling that, but you also have 8 million tracks down here to work with. Each one will correspond to anything else. If something's broken, you can break. Let's not go into that, but you do have a possibility to delete stuff from here. It won't delete it from here. But for don't worry about that. What I said before, stick to that, and that's try to break stuff. Try to get sounds that aren't supposed to happen, and that will become your sound. And having said that, that has become the end of our video. So I hope that did help you. I appreciate you tuning in on this. And what I will appreciate even more than that is that if you put this video and what you've learned in this video to good use, make something happen, make something that can give some kind of direction, however you want to take that. If that helps you, that would make me happy. So with that, I wish you well, and I wish you good luck.